Hello everyone, welcome to the week 6 lecture on inequality. Today we will try to understand inequality from the lens of development economics. Inequality itself is a broad topic, and one could offer a separate course on inequality itself. Today we will only talk about some very basic concepts related to inequality and how it relates to the process of development, because that's our sort of main concern in this course. And we will talk about certain aspects of inequality that we should keep in mind while thinking about development and development policy in general. If you think about what was the view of development economists when they started working on or thinking about the process of development. Initially, their idea was that the development economics as a field should primarily be concerned with growth, right? Because development economics was the study of poverty and poverty reduction, and therefore, as development economists, we should be primarily interested in how to grow the economy starting from a very low level, and inequality should only be sort of a secondary concern. Okay. And the sort of the motivation behind the policy framework or the lens through which development economists thought about uh, poverty reduction policies or development policies was that it's generally hard when the overall economic conditions are very bad to reduce poverty while maintaining inequality or reducing inequality, right? So all societies are unequal, but when overall income levels are low on average, uh, uh, the primary concern should be to reduce poverty through growth. Okay. And the process might lead to some increase in inequality, but that sort of is something that comes with the territory. It's kind of inevitable. Okay. So that sort of is the Kuznets curve view of the world. So if you know about the Kuznets curve, so Simon Kuznets observed that as economy grows at initial level, with increase in per capita income, the inequality tend to increase. So initially, the relationship between inequality and per capita income is positively sloped, right? So it initially grows with per capita income when uh, uh, um, the per capita income is reasonably high. Any growth in per capita income beyond that will tend to be inequality reducing. So initially inequality grows with per capita income starting from a very low level of per capita income, and then beyond the point inequality starts falling again. So you have a inverted U-shaped curve. Okay. So that was Kuznets curve, and that's the idea that a lot of other development economists shared, that initially when the economy is trying to grow and trying to reduce poverty at a larger scale, the process involves rising inequality, right? Because there will be some people who will benefit a lot from it, um, from any of these growth policies, which will tend to increase inequality, but eventually it will become broad based. Okay, because sort of it will lift everybody up. Um, if you think about John Rawls' philosophical point about welfare of society, his view was also quite tolerant of inequality. So, for example, John Rawls the Rawlsian welfare function is that you focus on the people who have the least amount of welfare, and you want to say that the social welfare is going to be higher only when the worst lot does better, right? So it's the sort of min function. So you have a minimum of, so your social welfare is minimum of utilities of all individuals, and the social welfare is therefore higher only when the minimum is higher, only when the worst lot gets better. Okay. So therefore any so why is this view accepting of rising inequality? It's because when any social process increases the worse lot, if at the same time it's increasing the better of even better, Rawls would say that's good, because that's, that's increasing social welfare, because it's increasing the life, the quality of life of the worse lot people. So uh, social policies that sort of lifts the bottom up while increasing inequality is, in Rawls's view, a welfare increasing change. Okay, so therefore, this sort of philosophical point that Rawls put forward of social welfare, which can seem, very focused towards the 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 uh, the, the bottom lot, also is accepting of rising inequality. Um, However, more recently, development economists have started questioning this growth equity trade-off. This idea that, growth, initial level of growth for the developing countries can only come at the cost of, should, it's kind of inevitable that it would come at the cost of equity. This idea that that there is a trade-off between having high growth versus high equity, this seems questionable, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that a bit later. But the main point that economists are now recognizing is that inequality can have instrumental purpose to growth and reducing poverty, right? And so even if as a concept it may sort of be, it's a in it, if inequality in itself, if you think, is ethically we should be responsible for reducing, even that ethical concern, even if it's the case that that ethical concern of reducing inequality is lower in developing countries, we could still have a lot of worry about rising inequality even in developing countries, if inequality affects the process of development itself. Okay, so and that's a sort of a growing recognition among economists that the inequality itself has an impact on growth and poverty reduction, and therefore, uh, uh, barring aside the ethical concerns, we should be instrumentally be thinking about inequality even in development economics. Okay, so that's sort of is we're going to talk a little bit about. But before we talk about those concepts, let's first talk a little bit about how we can go about measuring it, so that we can, talk about trends and try to see to what extent it matters in developing countries. Um, so the classical way income inequality is measured in society is that, first we get data on household or individual level income or consumption from household surveys, consumption surveys, something that we talked about in the very first lecture. So basically what you need is an income or consumption distribution in society, right? And that can come only from this kind of surveys. And so once you have this consumption or income distribution in society, you want to see how unequal is this distribution from the benchmark of perfect equality. It's not that we can achieve perfect equality, but that's the benchmark against which you want to compare different societies, so that you can say whether some society is more unequal than the other society. Okay, so so we basically use the Lorenz curve to see to what extent we have, how to what extent our society is unequal. So the way we do it is that we plot we kind of stack people according to their income. So we stack the lowest income house individuals or households at the first, and then gradually we sort of order individuals in terms of their income, and then we check what proportion of people own or have what percentage of income, right? So for example, if you focus on the green curve here, what the green curve is saying is that for any percentile of people, so suppose you look at the bottom, say 20 percentile of people, what percent of income do they have? So that this curve plots that. So for every x percent of the bottom, so you start from left and you look at every x percent of the bottom population in terms of income and calculate their aggregate income and see what percent of total income is that aggregate income of the bottom x percent, and you plot that on the y. So for every x you plot that y, and so you get this kind of green curve for country y, and that curve tells you how unequal the society is. What is the benchmark? As I said, the benchmark is perfect equality. So if everybody had the same income in the society, then bottom x, there is no bottom or top, but any x percent of population would own x percent of income in society, right? Because everybody has, say suppose everybody has 1 rupee and there are 100 people, then 5 people have 5 rupees. So 5% of the population have 5% of the income. Why 5% of the income? The total income is 100 rupees and the 5 people have 5 rupees. So 5 is 100 of 5% of 100. So if you plot the line in a perfect society, a perfectly equal society, then you will get a horizontal, a 45-degree line. This pink colored line. Okay. So against that benchmark, you can check whether a particular country, how unequal that particular country is. So this relationship of what percent of population own what percent of income starting from the bottom, that line is what is called the Lorenz curve. So, and the measure of inequality is the area below this 45-degree line but above the Lorenz curve. So this entire area divided by the total area below the 45-degree line, which is this triangle. So this goes up to 100, right? You have a 100% of population, of course, would have 100% of income. So it will be a square, and you look at the triangle which is sort of lies below the 45-degree line. So the triangle is the area, the total area, and the area above the Lorenz curve and below the 45-degree line is the area that is sort of to be covered, so to speak, for the country to become perfectly equal. And so the ratio of this area above the Lorenz curve divided by the triangle, that ratio is a measure of inequality, right? And the measure is, it's a 0 to 1 or 0 to 100, depending on how you scale it, but that's called Gini coefficient. Okay, so the Gini coefficient is the ratio of the area above the Lorenz curve and the area below, the total area below the 45-degree line, which is sort of is the benchmark. So when will it be when will the area be 1? Well, sorry, when will the measure the Gini coefficient, which is the ratio of these two areas, will be 1 when the area above the Lorenz curve is almost the same as the area of the triangle. What does that mean? It means that it's a society where if you keep increasing the percent of population, you basically don't increase the income. So basically the bottom, pretty much everybody up till the 100%, just below the 100%, they don't own anything. So they basically track 0 along the x-axis, and when it comes to the last person, that person owns everything. So then it directly jumps to 100, right? Because that person owns everything. So if you include that person, then you get 100% of the income, right? So in that case, the Lorenz curve would basically be following the x-axis up till 100, and at 100 it will be this vertical line, right? In which case the area above the Lorenz curve will be the entire triangle area. So then the ratio will be 1, which is the sort of maximum inequality you could have. Nobody except one person owns nothing, and the one person owns everything. Okay. That's the most unequal society you could imagine, and that would be sort of the maximum value that Gini coefficient can take. Notice that in this discussion, we are not talking about how rich the country is on average, right? So the Gini coefficient will be 1 when everybody owns nothing and the one person owns everything. Doesn't matter how much he owns, the Gini coefficient will always be 1, right? So the average income doesn't affect the measure of inequality in measured this way. Okay, so it doesn't matter what this 100% of income is. It could be 1000 crore or 1 lakh crore rupees. It's the as long as the distribution is identical in two countries in terms of percent of population owning certain percent of income, uh, the measure of inequality as derived from this Lorenz curve is going to remain same, right? So this is sometimes called a scale invariance property of inequality. Let's talk a little bit about it. Let's make this specific. So the measure of Gini coefficient, the way it is calculated in from a sort of a given distribution of income across people is using this formula. So this formula gives you a measure of Gini coefficient, which is exactly this area above. Sorry, it's incorrect. It should be area above the Lorenz curve divided by the triangle. Okay, so it's the ratio. So that's the Gini coefficient, which is same as this. What is this? So suppose there are n individuals in society, and you take everybody's measure, income or consumption or what have you. It's any measure of inequality of any variable. So take any variable. Let's think about income, and let's compute the absolute difference between any two pairs of individuals ij. So for every pair ij, where I runs from 1 to n, j runs from 1 to n, we measure the for the pair ij the absolute difference. Note that the absolute difference between the income of ij is same as the absolute difference of incomes of ji, right? So the ij and ji are will have the same absolute difference. So we're basically counting the same difference twice. So that's why you divide it by 2. Okay, so that's the sum of all absolute differences for all possible pairs divided by 2. So divided by n square, because there are n square pairs, right? So this is the average. Therefore the sum divided by 2n square is the average absolute gap between any two randomly picked pair of individuals. You scale it down by the average of income or the average of the variable. So x bar is the average. So this is the ratio. This ratio is called the Gini coefficient. So basically it's the ratio of the average absolute gap in income between any randomly picked pair of individuals and the average income. Okay, so it's trying to check how different two randomly picked individuals are relative to their mean, relative to the mean income in society. Okay, so it's scaled down by the average income, which is why this is scale invariant. What do I mean by scale invariance? Which is sort of similar to this discussion about this area being sort of invariant to the average income. So suppose everybody's income goes up proportionately. Suppose you think about another society where everybody's income is lambda times their income in the previous society. Okay, where lambda is greater than 1. So you increase everybody's income by a same fraction. Then it will be lambda xi minus lambda xj. Notice lambda xi minus lambda xj absolute value is same as lambda times absolute value of xi minus xj, right? Because lambda is positive number. So lambda will come out of this term, which means it will come out of the summation as well. So because every term will every gap will have this lambda term, right? So you can take the lambda term out of all the summations. If everybody's income goes up by lambda proportion, then x bar also goes up by lambda proportion, right? So you have lambda times this on the numerator, lambda times x bar on the denominator. So lambda gets cancelled, so you get back the same equation, which means you get back the same value of Gini coefficient. So if you scale up or even scale down everybody's income, then the Gini coefficient remains identical. So in a country where say suppose there are two people, one with 100 rupees, another with 1000 rupees, then the inequality in that society is same as another society where the income of one person is 500 rupees and the other is 5000 rupees. Okay, so now this is a property of this measure which some people think desirable, but we can think about to what extent this scale invariance property makes sense. But this is a property of this standard measure of Gini coefficient. There is an alternative measure to Gini coefficient which also kind of captures dispersion in income, which is called mean log deviation, or MLD. What is the definition? So basically it is the average of the logarithm of the ratio of the average income to the income of the individual or household. Okay, so you take the ratio of x bar to xi and you take the log and you take the average of that. Okay, and this is a measure of dispersion because as different x's differ, if xi become very different from each other, this measure is going to go up. Okay, and notice that if everybody has the same income x bar, so suppose it's a perfectly equal society, then everybody has the same income, xi then equals to x bar for all I, so then the ratio is 1, so log of 1 is 0, so MLD is 0. So in a perfect society, perfectly equal society, the measure MLD becomes 0. Okay. Now why it is x bar over xi? Because in most cases, if it's the society is very unequal, then xi will be smaller than x bar for many I, in which case the ratio will be greater than 1, in which case the log of that ratio will be positive, right? So since log of 1 is 0, log of a ratio which is less than 1 will be negative, has a negative value. So log of a fraction is negative. So for richer people for whom xi is bigger than x bar, its log will be negative. But therefore, which means that because the ratio is this way, if there are more people whose income is below the mean, we'll have more positive numbers and fewer negative numbers. And so as inequality grows, we will have more and more people falling below the average income, which means that there will be more positive, you will be adding more positive numbers and fewer negative numbers. So that tells you that the MLD will go up as inequality grows in society. Okay, so this therefore indeed captures inequality. Does this satisfy scale invariance? Of course it does. Why? Because if you again increase everybody's income by lambda, then x bar also increases by lambda, so then the ratio remains same. Okay, so then MLD remains same. So then both MLD and Gini coefficient satisfy scale invariance. They also satisfy another property, which is transfer axiom, which says that if you have a small transfer given to a low income person from a high income person, then that reduces inequality, and that's reflected in both G and M. So for example, if you give suppose if you take a small amount of income from a high xj and give it to any small xi, one particular individual, then that particular gap between I and j reduces. It also reduces the gap of that particular I against all other j's who has a higher income, but it increases the gap of xj against all other i's who have higher income than xj, right? Because you are taking money, a little bit of money out of this rich guy. So relative to him, those who earn even higher, the gap goes up, but relative to him, all the people who are below, the gap goes down because he's sort of sliding down the income a little bit. But because I am giving the money from, taking the money from the rich person and giving to a low income person, this the pairs for which the gap goes up will be much smaller than the pairs for which the gap goes down, right? And therefore the Gini coefficient will fall. And same, by similar argument, you can see that MLD will go up if for such a transfer. So again, both MLD and G satisfy this transfer axiom, which says that a small transfer to a low xi from a high xi would reduce inequality. Okay, and that's a desirable property of a measure. You want to have a measure that shows that inequality goes up that way. Now, the reason why I discussed MLD is because MLD actually has one benefit over Gini coefficient, which is the following. So suppose the population can be grouped. So the population for which you want to measure, you are measuring Gini coefficient or MLD. Suppose it can be grouped into various subpopulations. So suppose you have you have the income distribution in the entire world, and you want to see income distribution across countries within the world, or for starting from a country, you want to see across regions or states of India, let's say, or you want to see various ethnic groups, say caste groups or religious groups, right? You want to see inequality in each of these groups. And suppose you want to decompose the total inequality. Suppose you want to decompose the world inequality into between group inequality, so inequality between countries, and within group inequality, so inequality within countries. So the world inequality is composed of two aspects: how unequal countries are on average, and how equal people are within those countries. Okay. So the idea would be, can we decompose the overall inequality of a country or of a society into between group inequality and within group inequality? Okay. Is this decomposition possible given the measures that we have talked about? With respect to Gini coefficient, we can't, because Gini coefficient by definition requires us to compare every pair of individuals in the entire society. So starting in suppose you want to compute the world inequality using Gini coefficient, then Gini coefficient requires you to compare every possible pair of individuals either within country or across countries. So then it's hard to distinguish, because it's hard to, it's not possible for us to decompose or express in terms of two Gini coefficient numbers, one which captures between and one which captures within, because of the nature of the way we calculate it. But for MLD it's possible. So let me show you how for mean log deviation measure of inequality we can decompose it into between group and within group. So suppose world population is n and it is divided across c number of countries, capital C number of countries, and each country small c has population n small c. Okay, so if you sum over all n small c's across all the countries, you get back n. Okay. So then what is the MLD for world? MLD for world is given by this, where I'm denoting income with y. So y bar is the average income in the world, and yi is the income of any individual in this in the world starting from 1 to n. Okay. Now I can write y bar over y as y bar c over y, where y bar c is the average income of the country in which I belongs. So I'm writing y bar over y as y bar c over y times y bar over y bar c, right? So since it's within log, so then it becomes sum over logs. So log of y bar c over yi plus log of y bar over y bar c. Okay, summed over 1 to n. Notice this sum, this number is constant for all I within a country. When, right? So when I'm summing over 1 over n for in the entire world population, for all the individuals which are within a country, this number is same. So I'm basically summing the same number in c number of times within a country c. So for country small c, this will be the sum will be nc times this, right? For all, because for all individuals within c, country c, this is the same value. So it will be nc time log c, and there are c such countries. So basically sum over 1 to n log of this term is nothing but summing over 1 to number of countries c in c times this log, right? Because for each country I'm summing this nc number of times, so I am writing nc times log, and I have 1 over n here. Okay, so this, the second expression becomes this. What about the first expression? So the first expression is log of y bar c over yi. I am summing over 1 to n. So I can rearrange the order of this sum. So this is summing over the entire world population, right? N is the number of total population in the world. So don't look at this ratio first, look at these two sums. So instead of writing 1 to n, I am writing for each country small c, I am summing over 1 to nc. I am summing over all the that country's population, and then I am summing over all the countries, right? So instead of writing 1 to n, I am writing it this way. Is the same thing. If you ignore this term in the middle, I am first for each country c, I am summing over all the individuals across the country, and then I am summing over all the countries. Okay, it's the same thing. Now within this I am multiplying and dividing by nc. So now look at this term 1 over nc. So for each c fixed, I am dividing, I have 1 over nc times sum 1 to nc log of this. So basically then this is country specific MLD. For country c, the MLD is that country's average income divided by an individual's income divided of that country, and the average of that log for that country. So 1 over c, this is basically MLD of the country c, the within country inequality, right? So this is the within country inequality. So that becomes the second term. Okay. Now basically what I do, I bring this n inside, so I have nc over c. So this is the fraction of world population that lives in country c, right? That's the ratio. So I have fraction of the country c, you know, I have share of population living in country c multiplied by within country MLD for that country c, summed over all countries 1 to c. So then this first sum becomes weighted average of the all within country MLC. So this is the average of within country inequality, but this average is weighted by population. So this is population share weighted average of within country inequality. What is this? So again, if I take the instead of taking n outside, I take the average population of a country. So what is n? I can write n as number of countries times the average population in a country, which is n bar c. So it's c times n bar c. So n is c times n bar c. I take the n bar c inside. So then what is this? This is the ratio of a country's population to the average population, right? So this is another weight. So basically this weight tells you how big a country is relative to the average country. Again, you see this entire expression as an MLD across countries, because you have y bar of the world population divided by y bar of the country for different countries but then this is weighted by how big the country is relative to the average country. So again, it's also a population weighted, but it's population relative to the average population of the country, not the total population as it is in the first case. So this is a weighted value of the MLD of between country inequality, right? It's between country because my unit is a country here, and I'm measuring the country's average income with respect to the average income of the world. Okay, so so this is basically the between country MLD with the appropriate weight used. So then basically you can decompose the world inequality into these two ways. This is the average within country MLD or average within country inequality, with the average being taken with respect to population weights, and this is also a weighted value of the between country inequality. Okay, so that's the decomposition. Now, using this decomposition, Martin Ravallian plots the world inequality and the between in terms of the total inequality and the between country inequality, and the vertical gap between the total and the between country inequality gives you the within country inequality for starting from 1980 to 2010. What you see is the overall the total inequality is going down until early 2000, after which it has started increasing again. And if you see the within country inequality, which is the vertical gap, that has been growing until mid 2000. After that, it started shrinking again. So it for example, initially it was the within country inequality was about 30% of the total inequality, and it increased to about 47%. So it became half of, so by mid 2000, half of the total world inequality can be explained by within country inequality. So both within country inequality and between country inequality are equally important in explaining the world inequality today. Okay, and this sort of graph shows that pattern has started changing a little bit towards the end, and this is a period when a lot of poor developing countries started growing a bit rapidly, which probably resulted in increasing within country inequality. So this graph is plotting the average growth rate in household income per capita for in various periods, and whether there was any change. It measures the change in inequality as measured by change in MLD relative to few years ago. Okay, so in 1984 it had a low growth, and the inequality increased. So the change in inequality is negative. So inequality is increasing. Sorry, inequality is reducing because the change is negative, right? So if you see these early years, you see that the growth was low, and the inequality either fell or increased by a very small value. Uh, in the later years, the growth has been high and the inequality has been going up. Okay, and so if you sort of plot this relationship of average growth rate over this period and change in inequality, you see a positive relationship. So basically what this says is that if the country grows more, it tend to increase inequality. Okay, so that sort of is the sort of the first part of the Kuznets curve. Okay, so that's what uh, 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 that's what you see. Now, if you do it for within country and within, sorry, between country and within country separately, what you see is most of the positive relationship is coming from between country inequality. So when growth uh, rate is higher, it tend to increase between country inequality over the years. Okay. However, when we look at within country inequality, that tends to be relatively flat. Okay, and if anything, it's kind of going down a little bit. Okay, so it's not the case that when growth rate is higher, within country inequality tend to be high. It's just that when growth rate overall is higher, it tend to increase between country inequality. Okay, so that brings into the picture the idea that it's not necessary that inequality tend to have a growth tend to have a inequality increasing tendency within a country. It need not. So different countries have diverse experiences with inequality when they experience a high growth. Okay, and which sort of is reflected in the fact that this relationship is relatively flat. So why one might expect inequality to matter even for countries who are developing and tend to are experiencing high growth rate? Why they we should matter? Why we should be concerned about their inequality levels as well? That's because inequality can have a impact on to what extent growth reduces poverty. So for example, the first bullet point says that researchers show that growth poverty elasticity of a country depends on the initial level of inequality. So what do I mean? The growth poverty elasticity is that to what extent poverty goes down when growth increases. So that's the relationship between growth poverty, right? So the elasticity tells you how sensitive poverty reduction is to increase in growth. And what this statement is saying is that sensitivity of poverty reduction to growth depends on initial level of inequality. What is the dependence? If initial inequality is high, the growth poverty reduction sensitivity is lower, meaning that if a country increases its growth rate, its poverty will fall by a smaller amount or smaller extent if the initial inequality in the country is high. So if the country has a very high inequality, growth tend to have a very small impact on poverty. Why that might be the case? That's because when society is very unequal, it means that growth processes tend to be driven by people who are at the top, who are sort of in the more beneficial sort of remunerative occupation, high skill occupation. And maybe it's if inequality is high, then there means that there are structural imperfections or frictions in the market that deter people in the bottom to sort of get the right skill or migrate to better opportunities, and therefore any increase in growth is only driven by people at the top. The bottom half of the people are not able to participate in the growth process, right? Because there are structural factors at work that impedes them from participating in the growth process, because they are not able to get the right skill or not able to invest as much as they could, etc. So they're not able to avail of the opportunity that is out there. Okay, and that will reduce the impact of growth on poverty, right? Because the growth will disproportionately benefit people at the top. So that's the first point, that we should worry about inequality because it has an instrumental purpose, because it affects to what extent growth will reduce poverty. And to the extent that we are interested in growing rapidly and reducing poverty, we should be worried about inequality, because inequality kind of in some sense captures the structural constraints imposed on poor people from availing of the opportunities that any growth process delivers or facilitates. Okay, so that's the first point. The second is that inequality can impede growth itself. So highly unequal countries can have a negative impact on the growth process itself. So if a developing country is very highly unequal to begin with, then it would be the case that people at the bottom may be stuck in poverty traps, right? In which case they will not be able to invest the right amount, which they either in physical capital or in human capital. And notice that if people are stuck in poverty trap, even the people who would get a lot of benefit out of investment, they will not be able to do so. So think about the Bangladesh intervention. There were people who benefited a lot from that sort of one-time capital injection, right? But because they are stuck in poverty, they are not able to do so unless it sort of comes from outside in terms of a government policy, right? So then the kind of so because investment in term has direct effect on growth, because this large section of population are not able to invest to begin with, who would have gotten a high return on their investment, it has a direct effect on growth itself. So if inequality is high, it means that not only it has a lower impact of growth on poverty, but it has a negative effect on growth itself. It's not able to grow as much as it could have given the potential. So both inequality, both the in terms of the growth poverty relationship as well as growth itself, inequality seems to have a negative impact, and therefore even development economies should worry about the level of inequality in developing countries, because it can reflect the various structural constraints that poor people face to grow out of poverty. Let's come back to the scale invariance idea. So I mentioned that so for example, the inequality between two individuals with 100 and 1000 income is the same as two individuals having 5000 and 500 income, right? Now, even though that's sort of reflected in the standard measure of inequality in Gini coefficient and MLD, not everybody thinks that that's a desirable property of a measure of inequality. So our measures of inequality are relative inequality, in the sense that relative to the mean we measure how unequal the society is. So when mean goes up, it sort of keeps the ratio intact. However, if you think about the example I just gave, the absolute gap between 5000 and 500 is much larger than the absolute gap between 1000 and 100. And the absolute gap may matter. Some people may indeed care about that the absolute gap is going up, right? If the fact that somebody has such a large income in absolute value relative to compared to the poor person, it may in turn can have other detrimental effects. It could be that if you increase everybody's income by 5, the rich people become so rich that they are able to distort policy formulation, because they are able to capture politics, etc., right? So absolute values can matter. And what you indeed see is that the relationship between growth and the Gini coefficient income, within country income, even though so the relative Gini index is the standard Gini index, even though that relationship is flat, the relationship is indeed positive with respect to the absolute value of absolute measure of Gini index, where you basically don't have the x bar in the denominator. So if I can go back, so you have x bar in the denominator, so that's the relative Gini coefficient. If you get rid of the x bar, so then you're just measuring the absolute gap in incomes of randomly picked pairs. Then it will be the absolute measure of Gini index. So the absolute measure of Gini index is indeed rising. Sorry, absolute measure of Gini index is indeed rising with rising growth. Okay, So in areas or periods when there is higher growth, that tend to have higher absolute value of Gini index, which tells you that the absolute gap tend to increase with growth, even though the relative gap can either go up or down. It's kind of not, there is no strict relationship. And the question is it, do indeed people think that that's the case? So um, so which one is a more natural measure of inequality? Is the Gini coefficient, as I defined earlier, is the natural one, or the one without the x bar in the denominator is the natural one? Which notion of inequality do you think is the more appropriate measure of inequality? And the opinion seems to be divided. So various people have run experiments, including Ravallian, in various settings, and it looks like a substantial proportion of the experiment subjects. So about half of the experiment subjects think that absolute measure is the relevant one. Okay, which tells you that from sort of general public's point of view, scale invariance is not a self-evident axiom. A lot of people think that absolute measure, you should worry about the absolute gaps in income rather than gaps relative to the mean income. So maybe that's something that we should think about, and we should think about ways in which a relative inequality versus absolute inequality can have different effects on the development process. So for example, it could be that two countries which have the same relative Gini coefficient, which is the standard Gini coefficient, but but one having a larger absolute inequality than the other, there it's easier for the elite to capture politics. Maybe that's the case. Maybe overall, even conditional on relative inequality, the absolute inequality matters for to what extent the political process get distorted in favor of the elite, and therefore we should worry about absolute inequality as well. So one can sort of do these kind of studies or to think about why absolute inequality can have instrumental importance in the process of development. Okay. Finally, let's talk a little bit briefly about people's tolerance or beliefs, views about inequality. So is it the case that if you live in a more unequal society, it shapes your view about fairness with respect to inequality or equality? So is it the case that we live in India, which is a highly unequal society, shapes our tolerance for inequality? Okay. Now, maybe different people, maybe our tolerance for inequality to some extent depends on what is the inequality generating process. Is the inequality because some people are meritorious and some people are not, or is it because that they are born into situations which sort of led them to lead very different kinds of lives, right? So our view about to what extent we are okay with inequality may depend on whether the inequality is because of structural factors, which effectively boils down to luck, because different people, being born to a rich family or a poor family is basically luck, uh, um, or is it because of individual factors, meaning that some people are more industrious, more meritorious, and therefore they lead they get a higher reward from that economic activities than others. So this merit versus luck could play a role in shaping our views about to what extent we think inequality is fine. But is it the case that over and above this merit view, uh, um, the level of inequality in our society actually shapes to what extent we think inequality is fine, even if we have same even if we have similar attitudes towards this merit versus luck idea? Okay, so that's an important question to understand, because if our fundamental tolerance for inequality is different across societies, then it can directly shape policy debates, right? If we are just by the virtue of the fact that we live in India, which is an unequal society, if that makes us very tolerant of inequality, it will it will shape policy debates differently, as opposed to a case where if you are very intolerant of inequality because we are living in a relatively equal society. So then any small increase in inequality will bug us a lot. It will become a debate in news media, in the public policy circle, and that will shape the policy formulation in the political process. Okay. So maybe apart from this merit versus luck idea, uh, uh, um, the absolute level of inequality shapes our view of inequality in general. Or maybe it is the case that because we live in a highly unequal society, it not only shapes our tolerance for inequality, but it also shapes to what extent we view what extent we view this merit versus luck argument. Or this merit versus luck distinction may be more pronounced in countries with high inequality than with low inequality. Maybe in countries that have very low inequality, they don't make such a big distinction between merit and luck. Okay. Maybe in countries which are high inequality, something, countries like ours, we make a strong distinction between merit and luck, because we really think that the existing level of inequality is generated by merit, and that's why, sort of self-rationalization by people who are better off. Okay. So it would be important to explore this idea, and it is related to the point that Amartya Sen mentioned, which I sort of highlighted in my first lecture, where he pointed out that Europe and US differ quite a lot in terms of what aspect of welfare that they're really obsessed over. So, for example, in US, it's all right that access to health is highly unequal across people, but they cannot tolerate uh, uh, unemployment, very high unemployment, right? It will become a policy debate. Employment, so basically, inequality in opportunity to employment, that is considered a highly unjust state of the economy, as opposed to access to health. In Europe, it's the other way around. It's all right if people do not have employment, because the state has generous unemployment insurance, and overall the society is tolerant of people having differential access to employment, but they're highly intolerant of people having differential access to health. So this sort of highlights that different societies may be sort of looking at different things, and they may have very different views about inequality in general. So there is a recent paper that tries to sort of try to tease out this thing in a specific setting using experiment. So the paper is called Cutthroat Capitalism versus Cuddly Socialism. Are Americans more meritocratic and efficiency seeking than Scandinavians? So basically, what the authors do is they run large online experiments in United States and in Norway. They both have similar level of income and inequality, and their political views are on average similar. At a national level, the pools of samples that they recruit for this online experiment also are representative of their national averages. So the pools are very comparable in terms of their observable characteristics, and then they want to experimentally try to see whether individuals are tolerant of inequality, to what extent individuals are differentially tolerant of inequality across these two societies, and also to what extent their views about this merit versus luck argument differ across these two countries. So what they do is they have basically individuals in a given country do some small assignment. They are called workers. These workers are then randomly paired across each other, and they are told that one worker will get $6 and another will get $0. They don't say who one will get what, but what they do is that they bring in a spectator, and that's the main part of the experiment. So after worker completes the assignment, they are paired, and then they bring in a spectator and randomly assign each spectator to a pair of worker, and the spectator is then told what is the source of this income inequality. So they are told that that this person gets 6 and this person gets 0, and this is because there was a lottery. So in one arm of the experiment, they are told that it's because of a lottery. So, and based on the lottery, their income is 1 is 6 and 1 is 0. In another experiment, they are told that one gets 6, another gets 0 because the person who worked better got the better payoff. Okay, and in a third experiment, so the first experiment is a luck experiment, the second is a merit experiment, and the third is also a luck experiment. It's sort of, they are told that this one has 6, another has 0 is because of luck. But if you want to change, so the spectators have the option to change the distribution of payment before the so they can make it from 6-0, they can make it 5-1, 4-2, 3-3, up to 0-6. So they can completely invert it. So any change in distribution is going to be costly. So in the first two experiments, in the luck experiment and in the merit experiment, changing the distribution of income by the spectator is not costly. They can just do it, and whatever they choose, that will be implemented on the worker. But in the third experiment, where the spectators are told that the income is based on luck, is based on lottery, but if you want to change it, every time you take $1 from the rich guy and give it to the $0 guy, the rich guy loses another additional dollar. So the rich guy loses $2 and the poor guy gets $1. So there is a during the transfer there is $1 dead weight loss. The $1 gets lost. So it's a loss of efficiency during this transfer process. So it's like saying that when in a PDS system, when you want to redistribute through food grains, some part of it is just lost because the system is inefficient. So the redistributive system is inefficient. Okay. So people participate in these three experiments. So the third one is called efficiency experiment. So to what extent you want to implement, you want to make income equal in a luck experiment, even if the implementation was led to inefficiency, or led to loss of total income. And what they basically find, so this is saying that on average they have very similar characteristics. So if you look at education, it's very simple between US and Norway. If you look at income, it's also very similar between US and Norway. So this is the experiment pool, this is the entire population, and in terms of political views, conservative versus liberal, it's sort of very similar. But what you find is that, so what they're regressing is for each spectator. So the basically they are interested in what the spectator does, because they are choosing this they are implementing a specific income. They have the power to change income inequality. So they're measuring inequality for for the pairs of workers that each spectator is assigned to, and they're checking whether in merit assignment you implement a lower or a greater inequality across the two countries relative to the luck, and efficiency is the third one. So luck is the first one. So relative to luck, how how you change inequality in the merit and the efficiency treatments. So if you look at this and this, what you find is that they both implement high inequality in the merit. Both US and Norway subjects implement high inequality in the merit treatment relative to the luck treatment. So both countries seem to, even though Norway has substantially lower inequality in the society itself than US, they both subjects from both countries view merit as a valid valid reason to for inequality to exist. So they are much more both are both seem to be almost equally tolerant of inequality when it if it is generated because of merit. Okay, so the difference between, so here they pool the US and Norway sample, and this measure, merit times Norway, tells you whether Norway implements a differential inequality in the merit treatment, and even though the term is negative, it's statistically insignificant. So it's very noisy. So it tells you that both US and Norway seem to have similar views. Both Americans and Norwegians seem to have similar views about inequality when it comes to merit. But when it comes to the luck, which is sort of in the baseline group, which is the luck treatment, Norway seems to implement a large largely a significantly lower inequality than the Americans. So basically what you get is that in the luck treatment, where they are told that the income difference is purely because of lottery, Norwegians are much more willing to make incomes equal than Americans. So it looks like Americans are much more tolerant of inequality in general, even if they are told specifically that it's because of lottery. Okay. So they are much more reluctant. Americans seem to be much more reluctant of reducing inequality, and what is striking is that if you calculate how much inequality the Norwegians are willing to reduce, that gap is actually very similar to the actual gap in Gini coefficients across the two countries' incomes. So that's a striking fact. So what this tells you is that the fact that some people are born in Norway shapes their view about inequality, even if conditioning on this luck idea. That even if you are told explicitly that this is income inequality is because of pure luck, even then Americans would be much more willing to let the income be what it is than Norwegians. So this implies that they the existing level of inequality in a society shapes one's views about to what extent they are willing to tolerate inequality, and therefore it can have direct effects on policy debates around inequality, which in turn can shape inequality going forward. So if a country is highly unequal for a long time, it may be hard to change reduce inequality through a public debate and political processes, because people tend to become accepting of inequality. They do not go into the reason why this is the case. They do not find evidence that Norwegians are more liberal than Americans. That's why. So it's not because of political ideology. So the political conditioning on political ideology, it's still the case that Norwegian are much more intolerant of inequality than Americans. So it's something to do with their sort of natural view of inequality to begin with. So fundamentally it shapes people's beliefs over and above political ideology. So let me stop there. It's a relatively short lecture today, and so let's discuss this a little bit tomorrow and we or on Thursday, and we will debate the methods on Thursday. So see you on Thursday.